The Sound of Freedom film is getting a lot of attention right now. We're going to get into the film and your relationship with Tim Ballard, but I want to actually start with human trafficking because this is an issue you know very well. You've been heavily involved in remediating this and working on this issue for years now. But can you help people understand the size and scope of this problem?
Sure, Billy. First of all, thank you for letting us come on and talk about this and helping to raise awareness amongst your viewers and listeners, because human trafficking is still the fastest growing criminal enterprise globally. Human trafficking affects people in every country, in every state in our union. And so it's pervasive and much more prominent than people might at first believe. A lot of people think, well, maybe that could happen somewhere in a far off country, in a third or fourth world country, but not in my backyard, not in my hometown. And here in the United States, it's still far too prevalent, and definitely in many countries around the world. You know, statistics and experts often say that trafficking is the second most lucrative behind only drugs in terms of criminal activity. And I'm not sure that's still the case. Having done many cases from the law enforcement side, investigating human trafficking and drug trafficking, prosecuting both of those types of crimes, sometimes together from the same enterprise, I'm here to tell you that trafficking may well have surpassed drugs at this point. And so people just don't understand why, because there's a lot of heat, there's a lot of risk when you're drug trafficking. There are whole agencies, Drug Enforcement Administration, task forces everywhere focused on the fight against and the war on drugs. Not so with human trafficking. We're barely getting people to wake up and be aware that this is happening. And thank goodness for vehicles like Sound of Freedom that are facilitating that awakening and that awareness.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a real moment with Sound of Freedom because, I've covered a lot of these stories over the years, particularly movies and shows and efforts to sort of get the word out, documentaries. Some of them have been successful, but it's a very hard issue. I think it's one of those issues that people, they don't know a lot about it. They get uncomfortable. They almost want to look away because it's so horrific. And yet you have this story in this film that's so beautifully told that it makes you want to pay attention and understand. And so this feels like a really big opportunity right now to actually be having a conversation about an issue that is going on around the world. And I have to add here, you mentioned obviously in the United States, people probably don't realize that this is an issue here as well. When you were first coming into this in law enforcement, how shocked were you to discover what was happening in America?
I was absolutely shocked, appalled, but also taken aback that it could happen right here in our neighborhoods. My state of Utah is a great state. It's a clean state. It's a well-run state, and it's a safe state. And to find out that trafficking was occurring right here, we ended up in my office in 2014 handling one of the largest human trafficking cases in the history of the United States. And again, it was because people are very trusting. People don't think about it. No normal human being, in my mind, feels like, oh yeah, that's something that's happening. That's something that another human being could do to subjugate somebody else and enslave them and force them into this, hell of human trafficking. And so absolutely, I was surprised. But then more and more I delved into it in terms of fighting trafficking, whether it was on a policy level or whether it was on the law enforcement side. It opened my eyes, and I realized that there are many levels and there are lots of layers of this. And what we even talk about today are only the surface layers, and we don't have time to get into the darkest, deepest recesses of depravity that this touches.
Well, and we're going to get into your relationship with Tim Ballard, the work you've done with him. As Attorney General of Utah, these are issues that obviously are important to you, and you've had a long career in law enforcement. I want to emphasize that Sound of Freedom has been met with overwhelmingly positive reviews. The audience loves the film. I have seen the film. I thought it was phenomenal. But there have been a couple of reviews in large outlets. And one of them, in light of what we're talking about, I want to highlight it. I have it in front of me here. It's from Rolling Stone. And this particular writer basically says that the film is being passed off as a documentary, and this is a quote, rather than delusion by fomenting moral panic for years over this grossly exaggerated epidemic of child sex trafficking much of it funneling people into conspiracy rabbit holes and QAnon communities. But the part there that stands out is this grossly exaggerated epidemic of child trafficking. How did you react when you saw that response to Sound of Freedom?
Before I answer the question directly, Billy, let me go back to something that you said about this opportunity. Because for many years, those of us in the fight at all levels across the world have been hoping for a film that would be accessible, even though it's a very dark topic, for the average person to connect with and understand that every one of us is a possible victim, that every one of our families is potentially a victim. And we had like Liam Neeson in Taken a number of years back. I think that started like in 2006. And that started to maybe just awaken people a little bit, but it wasn't kind of couched as a trafficking film. This squarely addresses it and is such a great opportunity. And now to answer your question, my first reaction is what a shame. What a missed opportunity for somebody who has a sphere of influence to pretend that this abomination doesn't exist and to try to discredit those who are fighting against it. I feel sorry for the author of that editorial, that article. I don't know what turmoil is going on in his or her own soul, but to suggest that human trafficking either doesn't exist, that's an absolute fiction. And it comes from a point of terrible ignorance. I wish, though, and this is interesting, he said that we were fomenting, and I may get the exact verbiage wrong, moral outrage. I wish we were fomenting more moral outrage. That's our purpose, is to offend people into action, hope that they realize that there are little children, and men and women certainly too. It's not exclusive to children. The majority of them are not children, but the children are the most vulnerable in this. And to suggest that it doesn't exist, or that that those of us in the fight against it are exaggerating its pervasiveness and its effect on humanity, I think is, again, absolute ignorance. I feel sorry for them, but it doesn't deter us. We are so excited about the overwhelmingly positive response. Tim Ballard and I can't believe, we kind of have to pinch ourselves sometimes, because it's been a long time in the making and even longer in the distribution. And now that it's here, it is fulfilling what we had hoped. People are having conversations with their own soul and saying, you know what, if this is true, and I'm here to tell you it absolutely is, and anybody who tells you that it's not, or that it's exaggerated, has never been out in the trenches, has never worked these cases, has never put their life on the line like Tim has, or the other operators around the world, like prosecutors, victim advocates, survivor care advocates, all of the people who are in the fight, I think deserve mention as well. And so we take these types of criticisms as a badge of honor. No good deeds, no worthwhile endeavors were ever met without hate and criticism. So that tells us we're onto something. And the forces of darkness, they'll use many different vehicles to try to undermine the fight.
Well, and I want to emphasize here too, and I want you to tell us a little bit about this, because this very much is your story as well. You are involved in this film. You have been with Tim on raids. You have planned them with him, and you go back even further with him in government. And so talk a little bit about your relationship. I think it's important for people to understand this, who Tim is, because there have been a number of stories, right, casting doubt on his tactics or going after him on a variety of different things. And I want people to understand, I love what you said there. You just said, this is true. You know, Tim, you've been involved in this. So talk a little bit about the roots of that relationship.
Sure. Tim Ballard is a hero. No other way to characterize him. He was a very respected and successful special agent for Homeland Security, and he was effective at combating things like child pornography and child predators. When it comes to human trafficking, even on the law enforcement side, and certainly in government in general, there wasn't a lot of awareness. There weren't many resources. There weren't people really focused on it. And so Tim was a pioneer in many ways. And he developed a lot of skills when he had his badge. And then he made an incredible leap into, with a lot of faith, I will say, with his wife, to leave the security and safety of his badge and his pension and everything that he'd built up in his law enforcement career. He was also a great author that had a large following, lecturing at colleges and universities. He could have stayed in that very comfortable zone, and instead he gave that all up so that he could go out in the world and try to seek out and bring home and rescue men, women, and especially children. So if anybody doubts either his experience or his credibility, again, that's coming from a point of absolute ignorance. He left our task force in the state of Utah in 2013 and our ICAC team, Internet Crimes Against Children, to go out on his own, start this NGO called Operation Underground Railroad. And he had an ambition and a dream to take the skill set that he'd built up as a federal agent and go out and become essentially a confidential informant for other nations and do the heavy lifting for them and take the risks on his own. And with that, when I connected with him on our mutual passion for fighting this evil institution, we were very few in number. Our efforts were just starting, and the very first large operation that we went on, that he invited me to attend, because I do, for the state of Utah and for other jurisdictions we work with, combating trafficking domestically, but his focus was overseas. And we went to Colombia, effectuated a highly successful operation. We didn't tell anybody. That wasn't our purpose to try to promote it. We were trying to help the nation of Colombia and law enforcement. And lo and behold, the media caught hold of the story. And interestingly, it was the media generally, some of these same folks, I imagine, who are now critics, who broke the story. And it was a very compelling story. And back then in 2014, they were all on our side and they were all promoting this. And this was amazing. It wasn't sensationalized. It was true life story, where now, again, it's like, well, it's a conspiracy. I don't know what's happened in those 10 years or so in between to change these hearts and harden the hearts of these people. But back then, we were awakening the world through these operations, rescuing young ones, giving them their lives and their innocence back, trying to put resources towards their recovery even more than the rescue. And it was the media who was blowing this up around the world. We didn't think there would be a movie about it. And so, yes, I've been with Tim from the beginning. There are many others who are operators and support for Tim, but he is the voice of this movement. It's his story. And of course, as the messenger, he's going to receive the lion's share of criticism from those who are trying to hate. But in terms of the operations themselves, I'm happy to debate anybody, anywhere, anytime, in terms of the techniques that are used. I've seen them, I've participated in them. To be clear, we work under the auspices of the host nations. Many times they invite us in. They want our help. They want people to pose as Americans because they know that's far more effective than having someone from their own country. Why? Because it's usually Americans or Europeans or others that look like us that are coming down to the country to exploit men, women, and children. So we work under their laws. We follow their constitution if they have one. We coordinate with their law enforcement teams. We help put together their cases and have even testified in their cases to help put predators away. And while we're looking for trafficking, we may be helping them put together other aspects of their case: drug smuggling, money laundering. In fact, in certain instances, we like that they can bring other types of charges against the perpetrators, so we don't have to necessarily prosecute a trafficking case. Why? Because prosecuting trafficking means putting our victims, our survivors, back on the stand, making them re-traumatized, essentially putting them back through their horror. So often we will try to help these other nations put together a concurrent case But the effect is the same. These trafficking networks are taken down, and they start to realize now there's risk where risk didn't exist before. Cartels, organized crime, saying, well, this is getting to be more like drugs again. There are actually people looking for us. There are actually people putting resources towards fighting this. And that was our hope from the beginning. And the movie depicts it very accurately. I think the movie shows how painstaking we are in terms of preparation, safety, working with law enforcement in the other countries. So all of those things come into play, Billy. Probably longer answer than
no, it's incredibly helpful and fascinating. And you answered a couple of other questions that I was very curious about, when it comes to the tactics and how things are done. And you have been there, you have seen it. And this is for you, it's been a mission to rescue and help others as well. And I so admire that. I have to ask you as a final question in this, and you and I could talk for hours because there's so much to unpack. We'll probably have to have you back again. But how, as a human being, has it affected you? Not just the rescues and the happy moments of being able to actually get kids and others out of this, but how do you cope with the more difficult parts of this, the things that you have to see and experience and go through in order to get there to that rescue? What is that like as a human, as a person of faith?
Absolutely. Prayer, my relationship with God, an understanding of the deepest value of a human life, especially a child's innocence, my family. When there's this duality, and Tim and I talk about it a lot, when you have to go down into the depths of darkness to do these types of cases, you absolutely need to surround yourself with a lot of light. That light is a lot of internal light from our own faith and understanding that God, we believe, will help us find these children and bring them back. And then external light, being around family and trying to fill our lives with a lot of light. And I've got to say, from communities around the country, we feel that light. We feel their prayers. We feel their faith. And so as an associate producer of the film, I've got to thank every single person who's come and supported it. There's no way we're defying all odds. It's not by happenstance. We're slaying the Goliaths, the same companies that tried to keep this from getting distributed. We're outperforming them. We're touching the hearts, souls, and minds of Americans and friends across the globe. There's a reason, because we feel there is a light that emanates. And I want to just give credit again to some amazing partners like Angel Studios that brought us The Chosen, and Alejandro Monteverde and Eduardo Verástegui, these brilliant storytellers that came to us and said, let us tell this story. Of course, Jim Caviezel, one of the best actors, if not in my book, the best of our generation, at least among one of the top talents in Hollywood. Tim Ballard, amazing man of faith, who truly has put it all out on the line. He doesn't do the operations anymore. So some of us who are still active, you won't see us in the film. But when it comes time to hang up our operational hats, you might see us for Sound of Freedom 2 or Sound of Freedom 3. We want this to be a franchise to go forward, so that we can keep ringing that bell of liberty and awareness. So thank you to you, Billy, and to CBN for giving us this opportunity.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, and I'm looking forward to having you back again sometime soon.